everyone. Welcome to Top Score Writing's webinar on Florida's new Best Writing Assessment for grades 7 through 10. My name is Jennifer Jones and I'm the Director of Curriculum and Training here at Top Score. We have analyzed both the writing rubrics and the newly released samplers in order to determine exactly what our students must do in order to excel on this new state assessment. We hope that by sharing our insights and observations with you today, we can demystify this new state test. The Best Writing Assessment is replacing our previous state assessment, which was called the FSA. Now, the BEST is very similar to the FSA in a lot of ways. There are some significant changes, and we will be sure to point those out to you today. This school year, the 2022 to 2023 school year, is going to be a field test year. What that means is only some schools will be taking the Best Writing Assessment. Those that do will not have their scores counted against them or for them as part of their school grade. These students are participating in a field test, which means the state is looking to gather more information about how the students do on the state writing test in order to set parameters for the upcoming school year. In 2023 to 2024, all students will participate in the Best Writing Assessment. Well, I say all students, it's actually all students in grades 4 through 10. Now, one of the big changes that we do see with this new BEST test is that all students who take it will be typing it. That's right, even our youngest writers in 4th grade will be typing on their Best Writing Assessment. This is a computer-based test for all grade levels who participate in it, which again are grades 4 through 10. Students are going to be taking the Best Writing Assessment in the spring, and we hear that it's going to be before PM3. Now let's take a look at the Best Writing rubrics and discuss some significant ways that they have changed from our previous FSA rubrics. Students are now going to be scored out of a total of 12 points. They will earn these 12 points in 3 different domains. The first domain is called Purpose and Structure. Here the students can earn between 1 and 4 points. Now the Purpose and Structure domain is very similar to the Purpose, Focus, and Organization domain that we saw on the FSA rubrics. The second domain for the BEST test is called Development, and here students can earn again between 1 and 4 points. Now this domain is very similar to the Evidence and Elaboration domain on the FSA. The third domain of BEST is called Language. Now this is similar to our previous Conventions domain on the FSA, but there have been some significant increased expectations for students that we're going to go into in just a moment. Also, because of these increased demands, students can now earn up to 4 points in this language domain. During the FSA, they could only earn 2 points for conventions. So we see a great deal of changes in this language domain. There have been some reshuffling of skills in between development and language as well. So again, students can earn up to 12 points on the Best Writing Assessment. They will earn 4 points in each of those 3 domains. The state has also correlated these particular score points to grade level mastery. So students who earn a 4 are going to be demonstrating writing abilities above grade level. Students earning a 3 are going to be writing within grade level. Students who are earning a 2 are demonstrating writing skills that are approaching their grade, and students earning a 1 will be utilizing writing skills that are below grade level. Now let's take a look at the expository rubric for grades 7 through 10. So there is a shift in the grades that are included within each rubric. During the FSA, students in grades 4 through 5 had a rubric, and then students in grades 6 through 10 had their own rubric. Well, on the BEST, there's been a bit of a reshuffling. Now 4th through 6th grade has a rubric, and 7th through 10th grade has a rubric. So this is the expository rubric for grades 7 through 10. Now let's take a look at that first domain, Purpose and Structure. Anything you see underlined is going to be a change from our previous FSA domain. The previous FSA test had a domain called Purpose, Focus, and Organization. We now call that Purpose and Structure. These domains are very similar. The expectations for our students are very similar. Mostly what we see under this domain are some name changes. During the FSA, students were asked to include a controlling idea in their essays. Well, now they're asked to have an central idea in their expository essays. They need to have an organizational structure that strengthens the response and allows for the advancement of the central idea. And in just a few moments, when we dive into those samplers, we're going to show you some examples of what those organizational structures can look like. Students need to use purposeful transitional strategies that connect the ideas within and among the paragraphs to really create a cohesive essay. Finally, students should utilize an effective introduction and conclusion. Now, if you remember, during the FSA, students were asked to utilize a satisfying introduction and conclusion. So a few name changes there, but nothing really significant has changed in this first domain. Let's take a look at the development domain, though. Here we do see some changes. Students are asked on the new Best Writing test to include original student writing. Now, what this means is they need to show that they have thoroughly comprehended and understand what they have read. Students are not being asked to simply summarize the sources in their text set anymore. Students need to analyze them, think critically, make some inferences, draw some conclusions. They need to balance out the middle paragraphs of their essay with their own thoughts and ideas, original student writing, alongside the evidence. So we don't want to see middle paragraphs that are strictly text-based. There are a few new elaborative techniques that students can utilize to support their central idea, and those are narrative and rhetorical techniques. Now we're going to show you examples of both of these when we dive into the samplers, but these are just additional ways that students can elaborate on their topics and their central idea. Something that we see that has changed on this rubric under that development domain is that the state is very specific that students must pull evidence from multiple sources. So if there are 3 different sources in the text set, students should utilize evidence from at least 2, if not all 3 of them in their essay. Now, I will say when we analyzed the highest scoring sample papers for grades 7 through 10, most of those students that earned the highest scores did pull evidence from every single source in their text set. It is required, though, to get a 4 that you pull evidence from more than 1. Finally, we see that the state is asking for evidence to be appropriately cited, so students are going to be utilizing citations versus references in their essays. Taking a look at that language domain, you can see the new expectation is voice. So the state is looking to see that the student incorporates some voice into their essay that strengthens their overall response. Now, citation is not a holistic consideration. So what that means is that students' essays during the best writing assessment are going to be scored holistically for the most part, meaning a student may get a 4 for development and not demonstrate every single characteristic of a 4. They may have mostly 4 characteristics and maybe 1 or 2 3s. But if the majority of their essay indicates and shows that they are writing to a level 4 for that development domain, they're going to earn the 4. There is only one consideration. There's only one rule where they will automatically lose points, and that is citations. If students do not include specific citations for their evidence, they cannot earn higher than a 2 in that developmental category, in that development domain. So we must ensure that all of our students are specifically and accurately citing their sources. Now let's take a look at that argumentative rubric. So again, this is going to be the rubric that grades 7 through 10 will be scored off of. Let's take a look at the purpose and structure domain first. Now the first thing that you probably noticed is next to the word position there are 2 asterisks. So there is a discrepancy in the expectations for 6th and 7th grade to 8th and 10th grade in terms of claim and position. 6th and 7th graders are expected to include a claim in their essay, and 8th through 10th graders are expected to include a position in their essay. So that's what those 2 asterisks are indicating there. If you look at the other bullet points, though, you're going to notice that they are the same bullets and the same writing skills we just saw on that expository rubric. So students still need to have an organizational structure that strengthens the response. They need to use those purposeful transitional strategies to connect the ideas within and among paragraphs, and they need those effective introductions and conclusions. Now let's take a look under that development domain. You'll see here that students are still expected to include original student writing. We still see those narrative and rhetorical techniques added underneath the elaboration examples. Students are expected to include evidence from multiple sources, and they are expected to cite their sources. But let's take a look at the counterclaim. Here again, we see some differing expectations for the various grade levels. Grade 6, not addressed on this rubric, is not required to address the counterclaim. Grade 7 is going to be required to acknowledge at least one counterclaim, but all they need to do is acknowledge it. Grade 8 is going to need to rebut one counterclaim, at least one counterclaim, with evidence from the sources. Now, those expectations come directly from the best writing standards. So we do not see those on the argumentative rubric, but we see them in the argumentative writing standards. So we know that our students are going to be assessed based upon those expectations as they are outlined on the state standards. Now again, under the language domain, we're going to see some of the very same skills and characteristics that were on the expository language domain. At the bottom on the second page, you will see that again, that citation is not a holistic consideration. So what that means is that students must cite their sources in order to get higher than a 2 in that developmental domain for argumentative essays. Now, the state of Florida has released some very helpful supporting documents along with the best writing standards. The first is a complete list of all of the different types of elaborative techniques that students can use in their text-based essays. The state provides a comprehensive list, a definition for each technique, and an example. This document would be very helpful to share with your students. Perhaps make an anchor chart or give it to them as a handout for their writing notebook. The state also includes a list of the 4 different types of rhetoric that students may utilize in their text-based essays, and of course gives a definition and example for each of those as well. So these documents that accompany the writing standards can be very helpful when we are interpreting the best writing assessment rubric. Now, a new addition to the writing samplers that we found very helpful is the state gives a clear definition for all of the different reasons the student may earn a 0, and then they provide an example of an essay that did get a 0 with each grade level sampler. Now, the reasons that students may get a 0 on the best writing assessment is if their essay is too brief, if it is incomprehensible, or if the majority of their essay is copied. The state is also very clear that their essay will go through a minimum of 3 levels of review before being awarded that 0. So they don't take giving zeros lightly, but it definitely does happen. Here is an example from the 9th grade sampler. This is S number 11 of a student who did earn a 0. Now you'll notice that a lot of his essay or her essay has been copied. Any words or phrases that came from material provided by the state is highlighted. Words from the prompt, the testing directions, the sources, or even within the text features on the sources is going to show up highlighted on the scorer's screen. This is very powerful to share with our students. We've always had a discussion with them about how important it is to truly master paraphrasing, to use your own words when writing. Well, showing the students this example is a great visual for them that anything that they copy is going to show up highlighted on their scorer's screen. I think this will help them to understand the importance of using their own language when writing their essay. The state goes on to say that even if the student does add some of their own language to their essay, if the sentences or the words they add do not increase the meaning of the essay, they will still be awarded that 0. So again, an example of an essay earning that 0 is going to be included with every sampler from grade 7 through 10. Now we're going to take a dive into these expository sample papers. So for your reference, each grade level is only going to contain essays for one genre. Grades 7 and 9 are going to include expository essays. Grades 8 and 10 are going to include argumentative essays. But remember, grades 7 through 10 are all going to be scored off of the same rubric. So no matter what grade level you teach, you can utilize all 4 sets of samplers. Now what we recommend is you go to the DOE website and you print off all of these 4 sets of samplers, hole punch them, and keep them in a binder. These samplers are going to be infinitely useful to you as an educator. First use of them is to share with our students. Show them what a 12 looks like compared to a 9 or a 5 or a 3. Students that see their peers writing and how it is scored, it's a very powerful experience for them. We always at Top Score talk about modeling with good examples and non-examples. Showing an essay that earned a 12 right next to an essay that earned a 5, both essays are in response to the same prompt, is very powerful for students. The other way that these samplers are going to be so useful to us as educators is when we're scoring our own students' essay. Because here's the thing, as I'm sure you noticed when we looked at the state rubrics, they're open to a great deal of interpretation. The state lists the same writing skills under every score point for a specific domain. So what I mean by that is if you look at that purpose and structure domain, you'll notice that next to a 4, they talk about the central idea, the organizational structure, the transitional strategies, and the introduction and conclusion. They list those same 4 parts of an essay, those same 4 writing skills under a 3, under a 2, and under a 1. The skills don't change from score to score. What changes are qualitative words that describe how well that student demonstrated that particular writing skill in their essay. The state uses words like effective, purposeful, strongly, versus maintained, adequate, attempts, loosely. The tricky part about those qualitative words is they are subjective. What you define as purposeful may be different than what I define as purposeful. What my peer next door would call satisfying might be what I just call adequate, right? We all have different expectations. We all interpret these qualitative words differently. Well, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how any of us naturally define these words. What matters is how the state defines them. What does the state consider to be strong or effective or satisfying? We find the answer to that question in the samplers. So if you've never seen the samplers before, they are amazing. They are students' essays, actual students from the state of Florida. They're their essays that have been scored. And the state will say that this essay earned this many points for each of the 3 domains. This is their total number of points. But the best part is the annotated notes. So accompany every student essay is going to be a whole page of notes where the state explains why that student earned that score. The state even includes examples from the student's essay that illustrate the different skills found on the rubric. So if we're talking about a purposeful use of transitional strategies, the state will say this, this, and this are all purposeful transitional strategies, and here's why. So the samplers are extremely useful when we're scoring so that we can align our scoring to the way the state scores. Ultimately, that's what we need to do as educators. If a state would have awarded a student a 7, then we should be aligned enough that we would have, scored them a 7, maybe an 8 or a 6, but we would have been very close, if not have scored them exactly the same way the state would have. If the state would have scored the student's essay a 7 and I'm awarding it a 10, well, now I am not aligning to state standards. So we want to make sure that when we score, yes, we have the rubrics next to us, but we also have the samplers next to us as well. Now, the first thing that we want to share with you is just a bird's eye view of the samplers for grades 7 and 9. So this is a visual analysis, which means at this part, we are simply sharing with you how long every essay was and how many paragraphs, just so we can make some generalized observations. Now, you will notice that the students that earned the highest scores, so in this case 9 and above, all wrote an essay that was more than 1 full page typed and was 5 paragraphs in length. You will notice that as the scores get lower, the length of the essay gets smaller, right? Gets shorter as well. And at times the number of paragraphs drops. The majority, though, of the essays that the state shared with us for grade 7 are 4 to 5 paragraphs in length. So that tells us it is very important our students write an essay that is 4 to 5 paragraphs. If we want our students to earn a 9 or higher, then they should they should type more than 1 full page of text. Let's take a look at the 9th grade samplers. So again, if we focus on the students earning a 9 or higher, we have a lot more samples to draw from in this 9th grade sampler. all of the students that earned 9 through 12, again, wrote or typed, I should say, they typed more than one full page of text, and they wrote an essay that was structured between 4 to 5 paragraphs. So we could make the general observation that in order to earn a 9 or above for grades 7 and 9, the students need to type an essay that's more than 1 page in length and should be structured or organized into 4 to 5 paragraphs. Now, here, of course, we're just talking about quantity. Quality is of the utmost importance, but it's important to be able to give our students guidelines to say your essay needs to be at least this long. Now let's take a look at the expository prompts. So grade 7 was given this prompt: write an expository essay about the benefits of different types of housing. 9th graders were asked to write an expository essay about considerations that lawmakers should make when determining a legal driving age. Now, beneath both of those prompts, which by the way are super clear, very straightforward, right? You will notice that there's a set of testing directions. The language used on the testing directions mimics the language used on the writing rubrics, right? So we see central idea, use information from multiple sources, transitions that connect the ideas presented within and among the paragraphs, citations, etc. So the testing directions are utilizing the same language we saw in the rubric. So we're going to take a look at some students that scored a full 4 out of 4 for the purpose structure domain compared to students that only earned 2 points, and then finally a student that only earned 1 point. For these expository samplers and the purpose of today's webinar, we are only going to be looking at the purpose and structure domain for these expository essays. When we look at those argumentative samplers for the grades 8 and 10, then we're going to dive into the development and language domain. So let's look at the purpose and structure domain. What do students need to do to earn a full 4 points? So that is what you see on the left-hand side. Their central idea needs to be focused and consistently maintained. The organizational structure needs to strengthen the response. The transitional strategies need to be purposeful. And finally, they should have an effective introduction and conclusion. Oh, that word effective. That is definitely one of the words that we want to be sure to define for you all today. So after analyzing all of the different introductions and conclusions that the state said were particularly effective, we noticed some trends. And we think that this is a really good example of an effective introduction and an effective conclusion. Both of these paragraphs are going to come from the 7th grade sampler. This is S number 1. Now you're going to notice that the introduction clearly states the central idea, and then it restates it in the conclusion paragraph. The introduction also connects to the conclusion. The introduction is going to present the benefits of the 3 different types of housing. So not only are they going to talk about the 3 different types of housing that the sources talked about, which are prefabricated homes, RVs, and tiny houses, but they talk about benefits to these 3 different types. The conclusion is going to revisit those same benefits. So the student is clearly stating that central idea, they're restating it in the conclusion, but they really are creating a central idea that is beyond what the prompt outlined for them. So the prompt asked, let's go back to this for a moment. The prompt asked them about the benefits of the 3 different types of housing. The student has created a list of 3 different types of benefits for the 3 different types of housing. You'll notice again the length of these introduction and conclusion paragraphs. They're long, aren't they? They're detailed, they're descriptive. They are beyond just a 2 or 3 sentence paragraph. Finally, and this is very important, especially at the middle school level, the conclusion paragraph. We know we want to restate the central idea. We want to restate the topics that have been discussed throughout the essay. But the conclusion paragraph does that in a way that avoids repetitive vocabulary. They are not restating the central idea using the same language they used in the introduction. This is something that we want to bring to our students' attention because in elementary school, they often state their central idea the same way in their conclusion that they did in the introduction. They restate their 3 topics using the same words they used in their introduction. Or repetitive vocabulary is something we want to avoid at all costs at the middle school level. So this student's using synonyms and using their wide vocabulary to really express those same thoughts and ideas in a very different and unique way. Now let's compare that example we just saw to a student who earned 2 points for the purpose and structure domain. So this comes from the 7th grade sampler. This is S number 5. Right now, let's just look at the introduction and conclusion for this particular essay. What do we notice about these introductions and conclusions? So first, it's a lot shorter, isn't it? They're shorter, they're simpler. They just list the 3 different types of houses without addressing the benefits. Remember, the prompt asked the students to discuss the benefits. The hook found in the introduction is very simple. Have you ever seen a tiny mobile house? Right? So it's overall just a less sophisticated, less developed introduction and conclusion. So the state would say that introductions and conclusions are present, but they're either repetitive, simplistic, or otherwise ineffective. So from a 4 down to a 2, we can see the difference in the introduction and conclusion paragraphs. Okay, now we're going to go to the top of the list of the skills for purpose and structure. We're going to look at those first 2 bullet points. The first one says the central idea is focused on the task and consistently maintained. The second one says the organizational structure strengthens the response and allows for the advancement of the central idea. So what does that mean? What we have noticed from analyzing all of the essays that earned the full 4 points for this purpose and structure domain is that the student must state the central idea very clearly and explicitly in the introduction as well as in the conclusion paragraph. Sometimes they can also state their 3 topics in the introduction paragraph as well. They don't have to, but a lot of the essays that scored high did so. So in this example, we can see the student has stated their central idea in the introduction. The student's central idea, and this again is 9th grade, so we have a different prompt, is consideration and thought needs to be put in by lawmakers when making that decision. So first, the student in their introduction paragraph is really setting the scene. It's talking about teenagers and driving. Then they are going to clearly state their central idea. Then they're going to state the 3 topics, the 3 things that they feel that people should consider when determining driving age. First is the data that presents the argument that teenage drivers put everyone on the road at risk. The second, and you see this highlighted in pink, is that other causes of accidents as a result of teenage driving, as well as stricter laws that can prevent those causes. And then third is the driver's education programs. So after stating the central idea and the 3 topics in the introduction, what they're really doing there is they're setting up a strong organizational structure. Then the student goes into each of those 3 considerations one at a time. So the first body paragraph is going to talk about that first topic, the first consideration. Second body paragraph is going to talk about the second consideration. The third body paragraph is going to talk about the third consideration. And then in the conclusion, guess what? They restate that central idea. So that is a strong organizational structure. It is very clear to the reader what the central idea of this essay is, and then the student is going to develop those ideas one at a time. Now, those topic sentences that come at the very beginning of the paragraph are so useful, right, when structuring your essay, but the wrap-ups are important too. So at Top Score, we call the last sentence in a body paragraph a wrap-up sentence. Now, wrap-ups can be done on a few different levels. On the most basic level, a wrap-up sentence simply summarizes what that paragraph was about. On a more advanced level, the wrap-up sentence is going to not just summarize that particular topic, but it's going to connect it to the next topic, right? So this is where the student can really show the reader how the ideas are connected throughout their essay. What is the relationship of these considerations? The wrap-up sentence is an excellent place to do that. You can see in this 9th grade example, the student does that in all of their wrap-up sentences. So if we look at the first body paragraph, the topic sentence is going to state the topic of that essay, of that paragraph, and how it relates to the central idea. The wrap-up sentence is going to summarize it, but also link it to the topic presented in the second body paragraph. If you look at the wrap-up sentence in that second body paragraph, again, it is going to be connecting the information presented in that second paragraph to the information and ideas that are going to be presented in that third paragraph. That is one of the ways that this writer is showing the audience how the ideas are connected. They're creating a sense of cohesion throughout their essay by showing that relationship in multiple places. Now let's look at purposeful transitional strategies. So we're still focusing on a 4 out of 4 for purpose and structure. What are purposeful transitional strategies? So what you see circled in orange is all of the transitional strategies utilized in just one paragraph. We didn't circle the transitional strategies in the introduction or in the second body paragraph. Just looking at that one middle paragraph, you can see that there are a plethora of transitions that show how the ideas are related within that paragraph. So we talk a lot as writing teachers about external and internal transitions. External transitions are those words that go at the beginning of every paragraph, first, second, third, right? Additionally, in conclusion. What we have observed from these high scoring essays is that students do use some external transitions, but external transitions are not as important as internal transitions. Now, internal transitions are those words found within the paragraph that show how the ideas are related, right? This creates a sense of flow for the reader. If we take a look at this one example, you'll see that the first middle paragraph does not have an external transition. The second one does. It starts with the word another. But you see the plethora of internal transitions. This is what is required in order to earn a 4 for purpose and structure. Now let's drop a little bit and let's look at some essays that earned a 2. So we know that our students need to rise to those high expectations for a 4, but what does an essay look like that only earns 2 points for purpose and structure? Here we're going to go to the 7th grade sampler S6. If we take a look at the expectations for a 2 out of 4, you will see that the state says the central idea may be unclear, or it may be loosely related, or it may be insufficiently sustained. The organizational structure might be repetitive or inconsistent. The transitions are there and the student attempts to use them, but maybe they lack variety, they lack purpose, or maybe there's just not very many of them. And as we talked about already with the introduction and conclusion, it's there, but it's present and simplistic. So do we see how it's the same writing skills for a 2 as we saw for a 4? What changes is how well does this student do or include all of those skills in their essay. So what we notice right away, and circled in green, you will see are the transitional strategies. This student does use external transitions to begin every paragraph, but there are no internal transitions. So these are very basic external transition words: to start, to add, in conclusion, right? There are no transitional strategies that connect the ideas or show the relationship to create that sense of cohesion. So these are transitional strategies commonly seen in a student earning a 2 for purpose and structure. The other thing that we notice is that the central idea of this essay is not presented until the conclusion paragraph. So it's there, but it is not in the introduction and in the conclusion, as we saw a few moments ago with the student that earned the full 4 points. So this is a great example of a central idea that's insufficiently sustained or slightly unclear. If you take a look at those middle paragraphs, and I'm not going to read them to you for the sake of time, but you will notice that the structure is inconsistent. The student is jumping around from one idea to another. It is almost as though their thoughts are not organized and focused. So this is a great example of a student who would earn only 2 points for purpose and structure as opposed to that 4-point essay we just saw. I'm sure you also noticed the length. When we were looking at that 4-pointer, it was 2 full pages. When we're looking at the 2-point essay, it is only 2 points. So of course, quantity is not the only thing that matters. Quality obviously is of the utmost importance, but it's important to note the quantity as well. Now let's take a look at a 9th grade sampler paper. So this is S8 from the 9th grade set that only earned 2 points as well for purpose and structure. Now remember, the students are writing an expository essay in 9th grade about the considerations that lawmakers should make. Circled are the transitional strategies that this 9th grader used. They have very little external transitions. They only have one, the in conclusion. But more importantly, they have a real lack of internal transitions. There are very few words that show the connection between the ideas. When we analyzed all of the papers for 7th and 9th grade, and we were looking specifically at the use of transitional strategies, we saw that most of the highest scoring essays used some kind of external transition. They did not begin every paragraph with an external transition, but some paragraphs did have those external ones. What we saw in the highest scoring essay is that there was a plethora of internal transitions. We also noticed that the sophistication or maturity of the transition determined what score point the student received. So yes, the amount of transitions is important, but also the quality of the transitions. So here you see a list of transitions commonly used in students that earned a 4 for purpose and structure versus the transitions that were commonly seen in essays earning a 3 in purpose and structure. We can see automatically the difference in the sophistication and the maturity. So as educators, we know that this is a quick and easy fix. We can teach our students to not only include both external and internal transitions, but we can teach them the importance of being strategic with which transitional words and phrases they use. We can provide them with word lists and all kinds of tools in order to increase the sophistication of these transitional strategies. Finally, let's look at what we want our students to avoid, what they should not do. So this came from the 7th grade sampler. This is S9. This student only earned 1 point. Now let's take a look at the domain of purpose and structure where the student is only earning a 1. It says the central idea may be absent, ambiguous, or confusing. It shows a lack of awareness of the task. That means the student may have misinterpreted what they should be writing about, or they have demonstrated throughout their essay they didn't really understand the material. There is little or no organizational structure. Transitions are either absent completely, or they're confusing or used incorrectly. The introduction and conclusion might be unrelated, or they might be too brief, or they might even be missing. So here we see an example. This is a very typical example of a student that earned a 1. You're going to notice right away the introduction and conclusion are very brief. They're one sentence, and basically the student just restated the prompt. There is a very basic organizational structure, and it's repetitive. The first body paragraph is, here is one benefit of having a prefab house. The second body paragraph says, here's one benefit of having an RV. So very repetitive. There are no external transitions. There are no internal transitions. The entire essay is about a quarter of a page in length, so it is very, very brief. It was written in the student's own words, so it did receive a 1 as compared to a 0. Now let's take a dive into those argumentative essays. You can find argumentative samplers in grades 8 and 10. 8th graders were assigned the following prompt. Write an argumentative essay about whether facial recognition technology is beneficial or harmful. So the 8th graders needed to carefully analyze this writing prompt. They needed to determine what their purpose for writing is, what the writing task is, and who their audience will be. Then they needed to make a decision and clearly state their position as to whether they think facial recognition technology is beneficial or whether it is harmful. 10th graders were assigned this prompt. Write an argumentative essay about whether leisure time is better scheduled or unscheduled. So again, 10th graders are going to need to analyze this prompt. They're going to need to think critically about all of the information that they read in the sources within their text set, and then they will be prepared to write their essay. You will notice that both grades have a list of writing directions immediately following the prompt. And these writing directions use a lot of the same language that we saw on the best argumentative rubrics. This is very similar to the way those expository prompts and the expository writing directions used a lot of the same language we found on the expository rubrics. So the state is trying to make the expectations for the essays very clear and transparent to the students. Let's look at a quick visual analysis, a bird's eye view of those 8th grade samplers. So here you will see a list of all the different samplers included in the 8th grade set, the score that each earned, how long each essay was, and how many paragraphs. Now we can use this data to make some observations, and to help us set guidelines for approximately how long our students' essays should be and how they should structure them. Now we notice here that all of the essays that scored 9 and above were at least 1 page in length, and they were mostly 5 paragraphs. The essay that scored a 12 was almost 2 full pages, and again was 5 paragraphs. So we can tell our students that their goal should be to type an essay that is at least 1 page in length, and it should be structured in usually 5 paragraphs. And of course, that's approximate. 4 or 6 could be appropriate. We do see sampler number 3 was a 6-paragraph essay and it scored a 9. But for the most part, the trend that we observe is that these essays were 5 paragraphs in length. Now let's take a look at those 10th grade samplers. So again, you're going to see all of the different sample essays included in this set, their scores, their lengths, and the number of paragraphs. Now when we take a look at these 10th grade essays, we see that all of the essays that were 9 and above were at least 1.5 pages in length. So we see that by 10th grade, students are expected to write or type a bit more. We notice that the essays that scored a 10 and a 12 were each 2 full or more pages of information. So students are typing at least 1.5, if not 2 or more pages of their essays. Most of these essays were 5 paragraphs in length. Again, 4 to 6 is appropriate, but we definitely see a pattern of 5 to 6 paragraph essays in the highest scoring essays within a 10th grade sample. Now, when we are analyzing these argumentative essays that are going to come from both 8th and 10th grade, we are going to be analyzing them and looking for explanations as to how the state is interpreting the skills listed under the development and language domains. Now, these two domains really go hand in hand, right? You can't use precise language, you can't write with voice, you can't do all of those language skills without developing your idea. So that's why we're going to look at these two domains at the same time. So let's begin at what we noticed when we analyzed the highest scoring essays in 8th and 10th grade in terms of development. So we noticed that these middle paragraphs tended to be longer. And again, we're focusing on the essays that scored 9 and above. On average, each middle paragraph was 8 to 12 sentences in length. Of course, this varies, but that is the average. These sentences were not fluff sentences. They were not vague. They were not general. They were very detailed, specific, and content rich. Each and every sentence provided a lot of information to the reader. Each topic that the students wrote about, or each reason that they included in their essays, was supported by evidence from multiple sources. Most of the essays that we saw that earned a 9, 10, or 11, or 12 included evidence from all 3 sources. Now, not every essay did. Some essays only included evidence from 2 sources, but many of them included evidence from all 3 of them. So that's important to note. When the state says multiple sources, they do mean at least 2, if not 3 different sources. These high-scoring essays had multiple specific citations woven seamlessly throughout the middle paragraphs. So the student did not just reference or cite their source in one way, one time. They cited their source many different times, often in different ways. The students also, and this really is what sets apart these high-scoring essays from just the proficient essays, is the students included a great deal of original student writing. Now, this could be sentences that were narrative elaborative techniques. These could be examples. These could be inferences. This could be where the student drew some conclusions. In some way, though, the student would elaborate upon the evidence they included to show that they truly comprehended what they read. Often, at Top Score, we call these elaborative sentences your own thoughts and ideas. Oftentimes, these own thoughts and ideas communicated additional information to the reader. They helped the reader to understand the topic that the student was writing about a little bit more in-depthly, a little bit more clearly. Counterclaims. Counterclaims were present in all high-scoring essays in a few different ways. Some students address the counterclaim multiple times. So maybe in each middle paragraph, they address the counterclaim. Other students devoted an entire paragraph to the counterclaim, but then never mentioned it in the other body paragraph. So it is okay to address your counterclaim in different ways as evidenced as these high-scoring essays. Students did use some rhetorical techniques to support their position in various places throughout their middle paragraphs. Now let's take a look at that language domain. So what did we notice about the students that scored 9s, 10s, 11s, and 12s in terms of language? Well, the students mostly, for the majority of their essay, used precise language. There was very little general, vague, or unspecific language used. They were very intentional about their word choice. They incorporated a great deal of that academic language, that domain-specific vocabulary, into the essay. So whatever words, terms, phrases, vocabulary was used throughout the sources to discuss the topic, the student incorporated in their own way in their essay as well. These high-scoring essays, they varied their sentence structure. At times, students would have short, declarative sentences, and other times they would have long, descriptive sentences. Sometimes they posed rhetorical questions to their readers. The students utilized voice at times in their essay. So some students chose to incorporate and let their personality shine through in the introduction. Other students used a lot of voice in their topic sentences or their wrap-ups. Some students included a very clear voice in their own thoughts and ideas. So we do not need to write an entire essay that is just full of voice and personality, but it should be sprinkled throughout. Finally, we noticed that any grammatical error that was present in these high-scoring essays did not detract from the meaning of the essay. It did not interfere with the audience's comprehension of the material in the essay of itself. So now let's jump into some actual sample papers. So this is from the 8th grade sampler. This is S number 1. We are going to be looking at just page 1 of this essay. Remember, this essay was multiple pages in length, but we're just looking at page 1 right now. And we're going to be looking at these middle paragraphs. So I know you see a lot of color here, right? Don't be overwhelmed by the color. What we have done for you here is we have color-coded all the different skills, the different types of sentences that students incorporated into their middle paragraphs. So anywhere you see red is going to be where the student has cited a source, right? Anywhere you see blue is where the student has quoted evidence. Anywhere you see green is where the student has paraphrased evidence. So blue and green is going to be information that has come from the text set, and then red is going to be the citations that accompany that evidence. Now, highlighted or underlined in orange is going to be original student writing. Now, these sentences are of all different types. Some of their students' own thoughts and ideas. Sometimes it's a narrative sentence. Sometimes it is an inference. Sometimes it's where the student drew a conclusion. But what we can tell from the color coding, even if we don't read these middle paragraphs, is that the student created these middle paragraphs using a variety, a balance of elaborative techniques. Now, with that being said, does that mean that both of these middle paragraphs have the exact same number of quoted sentences or paraphrased sentences? Absolutely not, right? Do they have the exact same amount of own thoughts and ideas or original student writing? No. Obviously, paragraph number 2, middle paragraph number 2, has more of the original student writing than paragraph number 1. Paragraph number 1 has a great deal of evidence. But if we zoom out and we just look at these middle paragraphs as a whole, we can say this student included a great deal of evidence and they balanced that use of evidence with a great deal of original student writing. That is what we're really looking for in our students' work. We have seen over and over in these high-scoring essays that students that score well on the best writing assessment are going to include a wealth of evidence, but then they are going to elaborate upon that evidence to show the reader that they have truly understood and comprehended the material. Okay, so now we're going to jump into a 10th grade sample essay. So this is going to come from the 10th grade sampler set. This is S1. This student earned a full 4 out of 4 points for development and a full 4 out of 4 points for language. Let's take a look at how this student included a counterclaim in their essay. So remember that the 10th graders were responding to a prompt that states, write an argumentative essay about whether leisure time is better scheduled or unscheduled. So this student's position is that leisure time is better unscheduled. And they go ahead and they state their position very clearly in their introduction paragraph. Now in their first middle paragraph, they devote the entire middle paragraph to the counterclaim. So at the very beginning, they will state their counterclaim. And then they go ahead and provide evidence from the text about the opposition side, the opponent's view. After that, they offer a complete rebuttal, and they support their rebuttal with evidence from the text that backs up their position. So this is where they're really debunking their opponent's viewpoint. So here's an example from the 10th grade sampler of a student who devotes an entire middle paragraph to the counterclaim and does not address it again. As I mentioned at the very beginning, though, we also see students who do not do this, but they simply interweave the counterclaim into each middle paragraph as appropriate. When they do it in that manner, they only devote a few sentences at a time to the opposition's point of view and their rebuttal. Now we're going to look at the same essay, but we're going to analyze it for some language skills. So if we look under that language domain, the very first bullet point says integration of academic vocabulary strengthens and furthers the ideas. Circled in orange, you will see in this sampler are all of the different examples of academic vocabulary that the student has utilized. We also, at times, refer to this academic vocabulary as domain-specific vocabulary. You can see that the student has incorporated a great deal of this type of language into their essay. If we go down to the very last bullet point in that language domain, it says tone or voice strengthens the overall argument. Now, I mentioned at the beginning, tone and voice, we only need voice to be present at times, right? Sprinkled throughout the essay. Well, the state in their annotated notes mentions that the student did an excellent job of utilizing voice in their introduction to strengthen the argument. Let's take a look at some of the voice that we see. The student talks about their hopes and dreams and how they get bogged down and when they have a spare bit of time, and how sometimes coupled with the dread and the burden-esque quality, right? They use this language that really allows us as the reader to get a sense of who they are. It allows their little personality to shine through. Now we're going to look at an example of a student who only earned 2 points for the development domain and 2 points for the language domain. So we looked at a few examples of students earning 4 out of 4s. Now let's look at students that have earned a 2 out of 4. You will see here some snapshots from the rubric of the characteristic of a 2 for development and a 2 for language. Looking at the development domain, it says development may be partially or incomplete, right? Elaboration is attempted, but it may rely too heavily on the sources. It may include loosely related information. It might be repetitive. The evidence is going to be there, but it's only partially integrated or maybe only loosely connected to the topic. It might be unsupported or disconnected from the student's position. The grade level expectations for counterclaim are insufficiently addressed. Remember at the very beginning we talked about there are differing expectations for the counterclaim for 7th graders versus those 8th graders. Another reason students might get a 2 in development is because they might lack appropriate citations. And we're going to look at that in just a second. Let's scroll over to that language side. Vocabulary and word choice might be imprecise. They might be basic. Sentence structure might be repetitive, might be simplistic. They may have a pattern of errors that does interfere with the reader's understanding of the essay. Tone and voice might be inconsistently used. Maybe the essay is just too short or too brief to be grammatically correct, to indicate a command of the English language. So now we take a look at this 8th grader. This is the S8 sample from the 8th grade set. Let's take a look at what we see in this student's essay compared to the rubric that we just reviewed. If we take a moment and skim over the student's writing, you'll see that really they only partially understood what they were reading and intending to write in response to. Most of what the student has written is text-based. So the majority of this essay is going to have come directly from the sources. It is either paraphrased or it is quoted. Any original student writing that has been included basically just repeats what the evidence says. So this lets us know if our students are writing middle paragraphs that are mostly text-based, if the only original writing simply repeats what the evidence says, that is very indicative of a level 2 for development. When the student does include some elaboration, the connection between the evidence and elaboration is often confusing for the reader. The counterclaim is not sufficiently addressed. The student simply hints at it in the introduction and again in the conclusion. The word choice is very basic, so we don't see that precise language. If we're looking at the language domain, we don't see a great deal of academic vocabulary used. There is a pattern of grammatical errors that do interfere with the meaning at times. So again, these are going to be some of the characteristics that are very common in the essays that scored a 2 for development and a 2 for language. Okay, so what a big no-no, something we want to make sure all of our students are aware of. If you remember at the very beginning of today's presentation, we talked about how citations are not a holistic consideration, which means if students do not utilize citations in their essay, they cannot get higher than a 2 in that development domain. So this first example at the top, this comes from a 7th grade essay. This is from the 7th grade sampler. This is S number 3. Now, what I wanted to point out here is that the student does use, or I should say attempts to use citations, and those are underlined in red. The student says, in the article, the author notes, or the author states. But the state says, although this response demonstrates grade level accomplishment, a lack of citation prevents us from moving beyond the 2 level. So what that says is this state is acknowledging that this student's essay should earn higher than a 2 in development. It is a grade level or above essay. However, due to their incorrect use of citations, they are limited to a 2 in that developmental domain. Now you can see the student did attempt to cite their sources, didn't they? But they were not specific. They did not say which article or which author. So the author states is an incomplete citation. We need to say the author, John Smith, states. We can't simply say in the article. Remember, the students read 3 different articles in their text set. We have to say specifically which article. So that means accompany those evidence-based terminology terms, such as in the article or the author states. We must also add the title, the source number, the author's name, or the page or paragraph number. We have to ensure our students are aware of the difference between a specific citation and, in this case, an incomplete citation. Now, if we look at the bottom example, this comes from the 8th grade sampler. This is S7. The student only earned 2 points. Again, the state is saying how appropriate citation is not present. And they even give examples. They say the author, or the student says, the article says, the article states, and how that is not a valid citation. So these are great non-examples of citations that we can share with our students to help them understand the difference between a specific and complete citation and an incomplete or an unspecific citation. Finally, we just want to end with what does it look like if a student writes all in their own words, they don't just copy, they write a sufficient amount, but it is a very low level. This comes from the 8th grade sampler. This is S number 10. This student earned a 3. So we can see on the rubric that what are the characteristics of a 3? Well, the position might be absent, or their claim, it might be vague or might be confusing. There might be no organizational structure. There may be no transitions. The introduction and conclusion are either unrelated or they're missing. This development of the ideas, the position, the claim, well, it might be confusing. It might show that the student didn't understand what they read. Evidence, counterclaims, citations, they may all be missing or used incorrectly or maybe of an insufficient amount. In terms of language, the vocabulary and the student's word choice is vague, unclear, confusing. Sentence structure, simplistic. The grammar is so inconsistently used correctly. If there's so many errors that it frequently detracts from the meaning of the essay. Perhaps the tone or the voice is inappropriate. And then you will notice under all 3 domains, it says perhaps the essay is just too brief, too short to be scored beyond a level 1. So this is the lowest students can earn is a 3 because they would get a 1 for development, a 1 for purpose and structure, and a 1 for language. Now again, this is only if students do not just copy, because as we saw at the very beginning, if students just copy, the majority of their essay is copied from either the prompt or the sources or the text features, they will only be awarded a 0. This concludes today's presentation of the new Florida Best state writing assessment for grades 7 through 10. We hope that our analysis of these sampler papers helped to shed some light on the expectations of our students for this upcoming new state test. If you have any questions about this presentation or about how Top Score Writing can help prepare your students to excel on the best writing assessment, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can email customerservice@topscorewriting.com, or you can reach me directly by emailing jen@topscorewriting.com. Thank you so much for attending today's presentation, and I hope to hear from you soon.